Okay, everyone, let's start. So now it's time to present Karl de Fine Licht that will talk about ethics for engineers. And this is, of course, an introduction to the next handling you will do that has to do with analyzing different situations you can end up in as an engineer, but from an ethical perspective. And today you will start to give you a framework for how to reason and think in around these problems. Yes.
Thanks. My name is Karl de Fine Licht, as Knut said, and I'm a doctor in practical philosophy, and I'm also a guest teacher here at Chalmers, mostly teaching your teachers in ethics, because you know how they are. So you have a new sort of goal in your both bachelor's and master thesis, where you should be able to analyze the ethical problems that might be or might not be there. So that's sort of a criterion for actually getting passed on that one. So this is a short introduction for you to be, acquainted with this sort of reasoning, and then hopefully you'll be able to apply it later on. But I'm sure that you will do that just fine. I could say also that I'm currently working at the Research Institute, formerly known as SP, now called RISE, Research Institutes of Sweden, where I work on questions on urban sustainability issues. So that's sort of what philosophers do to get the food on the table. So I was thinking about just beginning with one of the cases you had. This is a sort of a quite good standard example of what actually transpires in the industry. It's an actual case, sort of anonymized, but sort of not. It's easily to find on Google. So I'm just going to read it really shortly. Sam Wilson, an experienced engineer, was employed by a med tech company that made medical equipment. An important line of products were respirators used in hospitals. A colleague of Sam asked him to check out one of these respirators, one designed for infant use. He soon determined that a relief valve intended to protect against overpressure being applied to the infant's lungs was incorrectly placed, so that under certain circumstances the infant could experience the dangerously high pressure. Correcting the error would not be difficult, since all that was needed was to reposition the relief valve. In similar circumstances in the past, Sam had seen such problems happen promptly. He called the matter to the attention of the appropriate manager and assumed that it would be taken care of. A month later or so, Sam was not directly involved with this particular device. He learned that nothing had been done. Hundreds of these devices were already in use, and Sam was concerned about the increasing likelihood of a tragic event. He went back to the manager and urged him to take appropriate action. The manager told him to mind his own business and took no action. You know that our product is safer than the others on the market anyway, he told Sam while he walked away. And the question is, what should Sam do in this case? So this is sort of a ordinary case. It's not that common, because it's sort of, or it has, quite severe consequences if something happens. And it's something is likely to happen if you don't do anything about it. But it's common enough for us to discuss this. So, okay. So, always when you think about these questions, and these ethical questions, you should think about, okay, what is the aim of think about these things. So, one aim might be to take the morally right decision. Right. So I'm just going to say that you will probably not do that, since that's really difficult and it takes a lot of work to actually even come here to take a morally justified decision. So what should you do then? What should your goal be, or your aim be? I would say take a well-grounded decision that you can decently defend afterwards if something happens. This to yourself and to others. So that is sort of a baseline I think that you should aim for. And it's something, I mean, your defense should also be something that actually other people can think, okay, this is quite, I mean, reasonable when thinking about it. And I'm saying reasonable people here because, as you all know, certain people won't take any kind of reason for an answer if they don't agree with you. So it's sort of people who are on the fence, so to speak, people who are actually willing to listen to you, those people. If you can convince those and you convince yourself that this is actually the correct decision, then you have something here. And that is sort of a good aim, I think. Now, for us to be able to go there, we need to be, or the aim should be, to be confident, right? Because it's real difficult to actually convince someone or convince yourself if you're not confident in that your position is correct, or if you at least have some sort of argument in favor of your position that is correct, or at least reasonably correct. Right? Good. You seem to follow, I guess. So, and one way to do that is actually try to put yourself in the position of other positions than your own, try to figure them out, try to figure how they work, try to figure out what weight other more reasons and your more reasons and your personal reasons, we're going to go into that soonly, that are in effect here in that sort of case. And the picture here is on famous and very controversial philosopher, Torbjörn Tännsjö, at the Stockholm University. He's retired now. But you can Google him if you want to know. I mean, so Torbjörn has really controversial views on stuff. But when you see him discussing these sort of things, you will see that he's sort of composed. He gives arguments for his position, and he tries to reason with the people he meets and stuff like that. So that should be the aim for you, I think. So, I mean, if you're not that controversial as Torbjörn is, then you will actually come off as quite reasonable and quite intelligent people. Because Torbjörn argues for a lot of different things. I shouldn't go into that here. So, does anyone know what this is? It's a map over the Gulf. That's obvious. It's an oil spill. Some of you are nodding. So it's the oil spill in the Gulf. BP, Beyond Petroleum, I think they're called. They're also known as British Petroleum, or I don't know. They had an oil rig who started burning, caught fire, and then it sunk in the ocean. And they had a huge oil spill. So, what happened next? The Swedish CEO went out on the White House lawn and said, BP cares about the small people. BP really cares about the small people. People were not impressed by that statement. And he's an engineer. He's also he has an economy major, I think, but he's mostly an engineer. And I think that why people actually didn't think that this was a good way to pronounce. If people really thought that he actually thought this through, what are the risks, what are the benefits for people living in the Gulf of having this sort of oil rig outside the doorstep, so to speak, then people might just thought that, okay, he's Swedish, he cannot speak English that well, it's okay. We know that he cares. Now I think that, the basic reason for why people actually got really upset because of this was because they actually understood that he didn't care about them. And he hadn't thought about this. He just thought that, okay, this is a good way to make money, let's do it. It's legal, let's do it. Right? So if you actually can come out there and say something with some sort of conviction and be sort of well thought through, then you will have an easier time to get through to people. Yeah, this is sort of you can see that they were swimming in the ocean, it's sort of folded up, but they would have looked like that if they were swimming in the ocean. So not that nice, especially if you think about, I mean, the Gulf, the Mexican Gulf. What do people live by? It's the sea and the tourist industry, right? And nobody wants to swim looking like that. So, okay. So you should at least take three steps to become prepared on, I mean, trying to answer these sort of questions when the shit hits the fan, so to speak. And the first thing is it's obvious, right? You're engineers, so let's try to examine the different sort of outcomes. What might they be, and so on and so forth. I'll go into that shortly. Then it's sort of less obvious, but it's still, I mean, you are trained to do this as well, to examine the different sort of values at stake. I'm not sure if you are, but I mean, most people who are in engineering are trying actually to, or I mean, are trained in this, and you will see that as well. And the next step is, or the third step, and the most difficult step, I guess, is to try to weigh these sort of reasons and values together and try to come up with a decent result that you can live with. So those are the three steps. So I think that this is on the portal, a sort of critical thinking thingy, and it just says, I mean, this gives you a way of analyzing this sort of decisions in a more structured way. So first of all, you should ask who is the agent. So in this case, we can assume it's Sam, but we could also think that, okay, the agent is the politicians who lay down the legislation and stuff like that for the certification, for the machines or something. Perhaps they should be more stringent. So that might be another agent. The company might be an agent. The boss might be an agent, and so on and so forth. What are the alternatives? What can Sam do? Sam can go to his boss, for instance. Sam can go whistleblowing, and so on and so forth. And then look at the consequences. What will that probably be? Try to map up the probabilities. It's really difficult often, but it still might be possible, at least in some cases. And then look at who is affected. If you do these things, you have at least a beginning of some sort of decision tree that you can try to map up. So I started mapping it up here. And as you see, it's not mutually exclusive, the different sort of alternatives often. I've just sketched out what might our outcomes be and what might the probabilities be for it. And the probabilities here are just a hunch from my side. But I mean, some things are quite easy to actually get a quite good probability on. So say that you have a boss who live in America, because this is in America, and you know that, I mean, the boss will let almost everyone complain once. But he won't let people complain twice. You will almost always fire them. Well, then you have a decent, idea what the probability is if you go to him again. 9 out of 10 or something have been fired. And assume that you're not special, you're just an humdrum ordinary engineer. Often people come, and when they talk to me and they are engineers, they just say, well, I'm just on the shop floor. I have no control. But you have, sometimes at least. So, but you can sort of map it out, and then you might find that, okay, it's not a moral problem at all. Perhaps I should go to my boss, for instance. That's the sort of idea I'm going to say, or I'm not going to argue for it here. I'm just going to say that that's sort of an alternative which seems quite good to me. You might think that, going to your boss won't let you fired, but it will fix the problem, and so on and so forth. So we might just assume for the moment that that is sort of the thing you should do, but it might still be a bit difficult to do. So okay. So if I'm an autocorrector, if there are, competing values at stake here, then we have to discern what these values are. And here is, the difficult thing, I think. So Knut asked me before if I had some sort of, what do you call it, some tool for analyzing these things. And I'm actually devising such a tool now for cities when they're working with sustainability issues. But these tools get so complex because there are so many values that can be defined in a lot of different ways, and people are not in agreement about which value you should use and which you should promote and stuff like that. So it's really problematic. So the only thing I have to say about this is that I have 2 slides, I should say, after all the slides I will show you today. 2 slides with tips on literature and at least 1 pod. So a pod series. And you can always go there. It's an encyclopedia also. But you should also know that, you really need to go into and look at, okay, what are the reasons in this particular case, and think about it a bit. Think about it a bit. Discuss it with people you know, because in the end you are going to stand there and you will have to defend this sort of things you do. And so if you just use some sort of generic argument I use, then you might not find that that is actually persuasive in the end. So think about that. Now, some people think that you only should talk about moral reasons. Moral reasons here are some sort of impartial reasons. You should do the right thing, what have you. It's difficult to know what that is, of course. But I also think that you should talk about personal reasons, at least when you're talking about your career choices and what you should do on your workplace and stuff like that, because most people would say that actually your personal reasons, what's good and bad for you, and only you, that is actually important from a moral perspective, but also from personal perspective. And some people think that these are one and the same, and some people don't think so. But still, what's good and bad for me is important, I think. So it's good to think about that. Now, when you talk about personal reasons, what's good for you, what makes me happy, or what have you, what has positive effects on my well-being, one sort of a principle that is often used, and this is often used also when you talk about, okay, what should we do in general with regards to climate change, for instance? What policies should we adapt? Then people often are talking about this, maximizing the expected well-being. Or her, I'm talking about here. Sam is a woman, but Sam is a man in my case. It's sort of difficult. So I wrote it wrongly in the first slide. That was why I stopped when I was reading the example, because Sam is actually a woman. Okay, so the idea here is that you should just maximize the expected well-being. So you should just map up different alternatives, map up the probabilities, sum the value together, and then take the choice that leads to the maximum of your well-being. So that's sort of an easy thing to do. Or it's not an easy thing to do, but an easy line of thought. Okay. Now it's often quite difficult to know how to do that. So even if you, and as I said on the slide before, oftentimes moral reasons and personal reasons go hand to hand, so to speak. So you shouldn't, just assume that doing what's best for me isn't doing the good or the right thing. So, but it's really difficult. And I'm not sure if you recognize this guy. he was sort of a famous one. Now he's, I mean, so it's Bill Gates, of course. But he's just doing charity now, I guess. So, but I think it's actually a good example. So, okay, so there has been done a lot of studies, and this is my line of research. What makes us happy? It's actually doing good things, being good, having a meaningful job. Then, I mean, so having a meaningful job should be interpreted here as you think that you have a meaningful job. Have close and meaningful relationships, and not being materialistic. So this sort of sounds like a fortune cookie thingy, but it's I mean, really substantial amount of research behind it. And the determinants of unhappiness relevant for you in this case. So the picture here is from, actually I thought it was quite a good movie from Finland. Came last year, I think. It's about a guy who works for the government giving permits to mining companies. And he gets involved in a sort of scheme. They say that they want to prospect for one thing. They want to actually take up uranium, which is not something that the Finnish government want to, and stuff, and so on and so forth. And what he experiences in this sort of case is actually quite nicely described, because he gets depressed from being tired, has a difficulty of focusing on anything, just think everything sucks, basically. And that is actually one thing that is quite, bad with having that sort of job. So you should think about, when you do your career choice, I know that this is going to come low down in your list, but you should actually think about, okay, what do I really think is a good thing to get involved in? Because you might actually happen to come here, and then you might be burnt out, as many of your colleagues before you. So think about that. And think about it when you're also working, because, it's often like that, many people think that, or many people get caught up in their jobs, right? And when they are there, they don't think that they can leave. What should I else do? I have a house, I have mortgages, blah, blah, blah. Can someone pronounce that? Mortgages. Mortgage. I have a lot of debts on my house. But for your engineers, it's always easy to get a new job. So, but actually, one other determinant for unhappiness is losing your job. So you should quit while you're ahead. It's a real risk, and you shouldn't. So if someone says that I do this because I don't want to lose my job, then those people are actually quite. They have good reasons for not doing what they're saying. So there might be even better reasons for doing something. And in Sweden, you seldom lose your job for doing the sort of good thing, but, well, I'm not sure where you're going to be. The first one. Now we know what happiness is and how to get it. Now we went. Okay. I actually didn't say anything about what happiness was. That's sort of another research area I've been really involved in. So I'm not going to talk about that. So, okay. So this is sort of just when you're picturing these sort of ideas, when you're thinking about, okay, how should I structure an argument when I'm writing a paper? This is the formal skeleton of those sort of arguments. You need an empirical premise where you say something about how the world works. Then you need to have a value premise where you say something about what you should do. Those things are really different, so you shouldn't conflate those two. And you have some sort of thesis. This is what I actually want to do, or have the most, combined good reasons to do. So, time is flying. Okay, so this is, I guess, the most tricky part for many of you. The moral reasons. Okay, what are they? Which ones are valid? And I've already said that this is actually quite difficult. You actually have to, engage in the literature and discuss with people in each and every case about these sort of things. You will be better as time goes on and you do this regularly, if you do. And I'm sure that many of you have been involved in this different sort of activities where you have developed this sort of skill, and everyone does so in general. So it's not a mystery, it's not a big problem or anything. But you should try to, see to it that you don't fall into these sort of very bad forms of reasoning. So you should always take, or you should never take, I'm not sure which, the Nazis. The Nazis are a really good example because people who are wearing skulls on their uniforms don't want to be portrayed as good people. So there are certain of these sort of kinds of arguments that simply don't work in the sense that you wouldn't agree to them if someone else told them to you when you're not agreeing to the conclusion. You wouldn't agree to them yourselves when you're thinking about them a bit more thoroughly, and people in society won't agree to them. So if they're not partial to your point of view. So this was sort of a very common saying in the Nuremberg trials, that we were just following orders. That's sort of a stupid argument. And not something you should use. So Sam shouldn't use it here either. I was just following the boss orders. That's not a really good idea. See? But you could say that, okay, I was loyal to my company. And being loyal means that I actually obey my boss. When my boss tells me something, and this was the most, pressing reason in this sort of case. Or I'm not doing any harm because it's my boss who's doing the harm. I'm just letting everything go as it goes on, as it goes, basically. I'm allowing stuff to happen. I'm not causing anything bad to happen. I'm not doing any good, but, And then you can ask yourselves, okay, when you met up with these sort of arguments, you can always ask yourself, okay, what do I think about these questions? Do I think that they are good? Or these sort of arguments of reasoning? Do I, for instance, think that the idea here about doing and allowing is relevant? I just allow things to happen, that's not morally problematic at all. It's doing that is problem. So if I cause harm, I do that through my actions, not my omissions. So that might be an idea. Does anyone know this guy? One of the richest men in the world, I think, Warren Buffett. He is going to give away 99% of his fortune when he dies or something to to Bill Gates, to his fund, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation or something. Okay, so about doing and allowing. You can always compare to another case if you believe that, if you want to test this sort of idea. So say that you think about, okay, perhaps I just can allow these children to die, and that might not be a problem. So if you want to test if you are impartial here, you can always test it on another case, and this is another case. You have a rich uncle, Warren Buffett. You come in, you go into his place, you have the key, you go up to his bathroom, and there you see Uncle Warren in the bathtub, lying there. He's hit his head. And you know that, okay, I will inherit, everything that he owns, all the 1%. It's quite a lot of money still, if I just leave him there. Or I can help him. Now many people would say that if I just stood there letting me die, allowing it to happen, you know, watching my iPhone, surfing a bit, taking a picture, then many people would say that that's sort of not the thing you should do, right? You should actually call an ambulance. You shouldn't stand there. You should use your phone for something else. So here, many people would say that, allowing this person to die isn't actually what morality demands of you. So this is one thing you can do when you want to examine whether or not different sort of moral reasons are valid. Try to put them to use in other examples and see what you think about them there. Do they give the right results? Can you stand by them still? Can you not? Then you're not. Okay, there's just one again. Let's go on. Okay. Step 3, weighing these sort of goods. So there is sort of different goods here, moral reasons or moral values, personal reasons and personal values. They might, point in the same direction, they might not. If they're pointing in different directions, it's difficult to say anything about what we should do. But so ideally, you go out, find every single reason, personal or normative or otherwise, just go through everything that's ever been written about these things, and then try to map it against every empirical examination that has been done. And if you are lucky, you'll find that, okay, given this, all normative theories will imply one thing, one and the same thing, and all the personal reasons will imply the same thing. Then it's easy. It takes a lot of time to actually go out and look for all of these reasons, right? But perhaps you can find someone to do it. So this is something that is actually used quite a lot when doing decisions under uncertainty. And this is one sort of uncertainty when you don't know actually, okay, what are the weights of the different reasons? But you can use it, in general as well. It's called hypothetical retrospection. It's not especially fancy or anything. It's just, the idea here is just, okay, think about again what we were said, what our aim was. It's to be able to decently defend the choices you made afterwards and be a bit confident about it. Have a more, be a bit more thorough in your reasoning than you would have been otherwise. So here is just, okay, when you have put up that decision tree I was sketching on earlier, all the probabilities, and then you start to think about, okay, what values are relevant here, and so on and so forth. And then you try to pick out in this decision tree the worst set of outcomes. And then try to picture yourself or your group. So this is often done by municipals, for instance, when they are thinking about, okay, how should we, how much resources should we put on the work that's needed for adjusting for climate change, for instance. Then they have panels where people are trying to understand, okay, so if this disaster happened, is it possible for us to go out and say that, okay, we actually did our choices on these and these grounds. It was really low probability. It costed a lot of money. We chose it to put those resources, I should say, on something else. And that's something we can stand by even today. So that is one way of trying to become a bit more impartial, which is going to be, for one thing, it makes you better reasoners in a moral kind of way, and it's going to be much more, you will have a much more easier time to actually persuade people afterwards, because then you have tried to take a position where you have to do that. So for instance, you can say that, okay, we have the alternative of doing nothing, and a child dies and the company goes bankrupt. It's sort of a rigged case from my part. So would you be able to defend that by saying that, oh, I was loyal to my company, for instance. I was following the boss prescriptions in this case. Well, many people would say that it's sort of not. It would be sort of like this one. Again, I was loyal. Most people wouldn't buy into that. Child died, after all. Your company went bankrupt. You should have done something. So, okay, so if we just go through this a bit quickly, it's sort of easy. Oh, it's not easy. Everything is easy and everything is hard, depending on what sort of ambitions you have with this sort of paper. But you are supposed to write a paper. So the best thing to, one thing to think about is to be clear and precise. This is something you've heard, I guess, all over again and again, but it's also always, important to say. Because it's extremely relevant in these sort of cases where you start to, or at least I have read, a lot of essays from students, engineering students, who are writing about everything but the question. So it's easy to get caught up, especially if you think these questions are important and are engaging. So try to stick to the point, the question. And try to think about, okay, what are the arguments and how are they connected to the conclusion I want to promote here? So begin with the conclusion. So for instance, Sam should go to her boss trying to get the valve fixed. And then just present your argument in an orderly fashion. So this is for example, this is extremely general, of course. So we'll have to, spell these things out by ourselves in greater detail. But so most people believe that we should benefit others and not cause unnecessary harm. And not doing anything would probably lead to less benefits and more harms than the alternative. And then describe some of the alternative and show that you actually have tried to think about these things. And then you can try to go into the counter arguments against your thesis, because they should be presented too, and they should not be called straw man. Straw man is when you present your interlocutors' arguments in a very bad way, so that person seems to be more stupid than he or she is. So try just to make it as strong as possible. And now, this is sort of a stupid argument, so it's actually difficult to do anything with it, but it's also common. Another common argument that's also stupid, that you shouldn't be using, is we always done that. So it's always when you have some sort of people often say that when they are discussing why they eat meat, for instance. So a classical radio show in Sweden, it's classical in philosophy community, because we had a philosopher who was interviewing politicians and famous people and posed them to different sort of problems, ethical issues. And one of the questions was, do you eat meat? And if they said yes, they had to say why they did. And many people said, oh, it's because I always done so, or we have always done so. And that is sort of a bad argument because most people wouldn't agree to that argument if they thought about it. And you can think about why later on. So, yeah, we have, in this case, we also have sort of, you should always look for, so here is, so here's the one problematic thing. So I'm standing here saying that most people wouldn't agree and most people would agree, and it sounds sort of from taken from sort of midair or something. And actually today there are quite a lot of psychological research where you examine both the psychological mechanisms producing this sort of judgments, but also trying to examine what people actually think just from when they are talking from the gut, so to speak, or when they are more recent. So there are a lot of these sort of empirical work as well. But it's really, if you are supposed to go through that also, then it's more of a research program than just taking a more well-informed decision. So that's not something anyone are demanding from you. But it could be good to know. So it's not, it sounds sort of like I'm coming up with stuff. Okay, and you can also take the personal reasons as well, or I would at least do so. Because there might be quite decisive reasons for why Sam in this case should go to her boss, which are personal. And if they are, if they are in conflict with the moral reasons, the impartial reasons, then that should, I think, come up in some way. Because in reality you will, think that both of these things are relevant. And I see that you are moving around here now, so here again, so this is more like if you want to make a final thing on the paper, you might take this up and try to, so it's not just you thinking out loud. It's always good to try to relate these sort of things to empirical studies, to laws in different areas and stuff like that, so that you ground your reasoning in some sort of way. And then just end the thing with what we begin with, a conclusion where you say that this is my conclusion. So, any questions? It seems like you understand everything and are really psyched for doing this yourselves. Am I right? Or yeah. Thank you.
So I can